Mike, I want to talk a little bit about evangelization with you. And as I think about that, I think of your own work with the Tonga people in Africa, and that is an outreach of the Diocese of Toledo. I find a great sense of pride in that our diocese does have this relationship with a particular tribe in Africa, that we make some effort to be present to them, and as we call it, the mission of accompaniment. It's a marvelous phrase that we accompany them on the journey, walk together, I take it, in the journey of trying to live out the Christian life and so on. It's part of our own evangelization effort, our effort to proclaim the gospel and to learn from others as well. And you've been a key part of all of that. And I know people went before you. You've been there 6 years. Mm-hmm. How long have we had that all together?
About 8 years altogether.
Mm-hmm. In your own sense of that, I mean, I feel a sense of pride in it. I think it's one of the better things we do as a diocese, and it enriches us and also helps us to share a bit of what we have with others.
I remember coming here before we first went to Zimbabwe, and you gave us a chance to talk about what we first experienced. A few of us went over before the whole relationship was established, and we talked about its importance for the diocese and how we needed other people. We're inviting other people to be a part of it. And it's really grown through the years in terms of awareness. I've been impressed this time that I've been home of how many different articles I've received from people about Zimbabwe. You know, when they see Zimbabwe, then they know of my concerns, so they immediately make a copy and send me that. I got a thing from the LA Times about the AIDS crisis. I got something on 2 or 3 people sent me things on the drought. A couple priests had gone over to visit since I've been home here, and they brought back different news articles that affected them. Just the awareness of Zimbabwe. People know, from our diocese anyway, people know where it is, and they know about some of the struggles of the people there. They know there's a bad drought going on right now, and they know that there's some gifts that Tongans have to offer.
I remember when people from there came over here for the synod that we had in our diocese.
Mm-hmm. So there was a married couple, Peter and Bilita Mulea, and a priest and a sister from Zimbabwe that came and enjoyed taking part in the dialogue in the
and brought
synod.
Greetings from the people there and so on. Yeah, it was very great sense of solidarity that they brought, and a feeling of they probably took back with them too a greater sense of what the church is all about here.
Took back some of the water from here.
Yes,
and
symbol of that.
A symbol of the dialogue, and they still have that, and they use it for special celebrations that we have.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So it's a part of our whole effort to be involved in evangelization, isn't it? It's our way of proclaiming the gospel message and so on. And what, there's a lot more talk about all of this. There's a little pamphlet out. It was originally an article by Avery Dulles in America Magazine, which appeared February 1st, 1992. It's called, now in this form, Why Catholics Don't Evangelize and Why They Must. And Dulles, with his usual balanced approach, tries to help us understand this in historical context, saying that, well, the term is not well received among Catholics, and we haven't been very inclined towards evangelization, and yet historically we have had a missionary effort. Talks about the Benedictine monks evangelizing much of Europe and so on. And he says that we've really learned now from the Protestant world to be more open to this term, evangelization. In fact, he believes that this sense of proclaiming the gospel, of reaching out, of spreading the good news, will bring us closer to the evangelical Protestants in the United States. It's an interesting observation on his part that would be a good touchstone for dialogue between these two major groupings here in our own country. But he goes on to talk about a new evangelization. I know you like that phrase, and maybe you want to comment a little bit on it, of what you get out of that.
Well, I enjoyed reading Avery Dulles' article very much, especially some aspects that probably the one I feel that is most important, how he's helping us see how the Church today understands that it's not the job of just a chosen few to evangelize, but it's the task of each person. and that each of us is called somehow, lay, clergy, religious, young and old, poor, rich, refugee, sick person, whoever is called to proclaim the presence of God out of their life experience. And that aspect, I think, helps us keep our perspective when we deal with other cultures and people in other cultural situations, that the approach from the beginning is that God is there before we get there. Mm-hmm. God is already there. There's holy ground there in which we walk. And to try to glean from them and hear from them and surface with them how the Lord is present in their lives. One of the statements that hit me the most, he says, it's actually a statement from the Pope in the article, he says, faith is strengthened when given to others. And
yes, I noticed that too. That struck me.
I've seen that so many times in our communities there, that there's a natural thing that happens. Usually a church starts by 10 or 12 adults coming together, and they send a letter or send a messenger to us saying that they want to start a Catholic church. They want to start church is usually what they say. And we come out, and then after a long period of classes and initiation, catechumenate and all of 2 to 3 year period, then baptisms occur. And it's not unusual for there to be 2 or 3 communities going on at the same time, along the same or about the same pace, because once they find something good in their gathering where they've invited us, then 2 or 3 of them go out and start another one. So we end up, when one starts, we end up having 3 or 4. But we're not the ones who go out to them. They do themselves. And they have great joy, great value in starting other church communities. So we wanted to keep things kind of small at first, and going over into, I wouldn't say small, but as much to go slowly. And now we have 16 to 20 Christian communities that we're dealing with that are spread out across an area the size of the Diocese of Toledo that we try to reach. And most of that is because of the people's own willingness to share their faith and desire to do that.
It seems like a sort of new vitality comes out of all of this, Mike, a new enthusiasm or a deeper joy. In fact, we might try to focus on that point that you've surfaced here, that this evangelization, this new form that Pope John Paul II talks about, is supposed to revitalize the Church. I think both his predecessor, Pope Paul VI, who wrote the famous encyclical on evangelization and back in the 1970s, and also Pope John Paul II, who has made it a major theme of his own pontificate, believe that good things will happen. I suppose it's based on this idea that the faith is enriched when you share it, and that when you get a new enthusiasm going that is needed. I suppose the problem here is that very often the Christian communities can become fatigued. We can fall into routine. We can just be into maintenance. If you think of the average parish here in the United States, maybe one of our problems is that it's too ingrown. It's turned in on itself. It's worried about how do we get the roof fixed, or how do we improve our liturgies here, and all kind of internal matters, and maybe not enough external outreach, evangelization kinds of things. So I believe that the claim is here that the new vitality and enthusiasm will come if we bend our efforts to this evangelization.
The Pope's desire kind of calls all of us to do something about that. Maybe the tendency in the past is I want to get involved in church, then I join a group that is just focused in on ourselves, rather than now the focus being that to evangelize means being willing to share who God is in my life, and to visit with my neighbor, and maybe bring that in, and not again like a proselytizing thing, forcing a person to believe, but that we as Catholics become comfortable with talking about different biblical passages and what Word of God speaks to us and what doesn't, rather than just leaving it to the Sunday or Saturday evening liturgy that we've attended.
I think that comes hard for us in the United States, probably because of the notion that religion is very private here. There's a lot of gatherings one would be in where you could talk about most anything but not religion, because that's a taboo topic, that's a private matter. We don't really force anybody into religion, and we're very careful with our separation of church and state not to meld the two things together. And there's a whole mentality, therefore, that you don't talk about it. I believe that gets reinforced among males in our culture very often by our reticence to talk about deeper matters of any kind, so that very often we find women in our culture not happy with the men they've chosen to marry because they don't share at a deeper level. They don't talk intimately. They don't tell about their vulnerabilities, the ways they've been wounded by the culture and so on. So we have a male reticence to talk about these deeper things. It probably feeds into this whole idea that in a male-dominated Catholic community we don't have a lot of sense of this evangelization. When I said male-dominated, I mean in terms of leadership. It's certainly not that way in terms of actual functioning of parishes. But the people who get up and preach regularly on Sundays here in the United States are males, and I think we have a double problem, a cultural reticence and then another male sensibility that says don't talk too freely about these deeper matters. And so we're not into evangelization very often. And I think that's why when you begin to talk about how it works there, it has a very different feel and sound to it.
Really, it's a different experience there. People there are not shy at all about praying out loud or discussing what is happening in their life and how God is a part of their life.
Is that males and females?
Males and female, very open to that. Yeah. We have in some ways a real privilege in being a part of the Tonga community where church communities are just beginning. Some of the communities we start with don't have any baptized people. So things are really from the beginning. People don't necessarily become dependent on the priest. They see that we don't come all that often. We're not able to reach them that often. So from the beginning, they're trained to preach and trained to reflect on the gospel. I would say more gospel sharing than preaching as such, where they take a gospel text and allow it to apply to their life, and then they reflect upon that. So
I take it you have sat in on sessions like that and have been able to hear how they do that and so on?
Yeah, we take they choose a different gospel passage for each week, in fact, and they do this in addition to the weekend celebration that they have during the week. They have at one point where they have what's called gospel sharing.
Is that impressive to you to hear them?
It's a beautiful experience. It takes a couple hours, but they sit and they read the readings 2 or 3 times, and then they share 2 or 3 words and repeat them over and over again, kind of like a mantra, which ones that have touched them. And then they have a discussion, and then they choose some project that needs to be done out of that gospel.
Sounds like our old CFM
it's
approach.
Similar to that would be.
The Christian family movement that was so popular in the 60s and right after the council.
Becomes a powerful way for other Tongas to learn about the Catholic community, because they become a part. They're all invited. Usually if they're in the village when something like that happens, they go to it. No one is left out or excluded. If there's a meal, everyone is to eat. If there's a meeting, everyone's a part of it, no matter who you are.
They have a great sense of hospitality and inclusiveness, don't they?
Hospitality, inclusiveness, and community.
I was thinking, Mike, about the enthusiasm question again. If we set the overall framework for this, evangelization has a dialogic character to it. In other words, we claim there's a Christian message, a teaching of Jesus, a wisdom that is in our heritage that is valuable, and that it ought to be shared with others. On the other hand, we realize you have to do that in a culture. And the culture, that sets up a dialogue between the given society and the cultural forms, and we have to figure out how to adapt that message to the culture. Then we have to learn from that culture, and then sending it back again, we have to try to transform the culture. And in that dialogue, it seems like there is a new vitality that occurs. It's like a stimulating conversation. If you sit and talk to somebody about the same old things for the 100th time, it's not exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a new perspective, a new idea, a feedback that you get, then you start to get new ideas, and it generates this enthusiasm. And that's how I'm thinking of the joy you spoke of in this evangelization process.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like what you're involved in is these creation of new churches. There's a new dialogue going on. There's a fresh idea. The teaching of Jesus is interacting with their particular lifestyle and culture and so on. And there's sort of a zest or synergism that occurs with that dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Just as you share that, I think of the different rain services that we've had. And
rain services?
Yes,
in the midst of the drought?
Every year, as the time for rain approaches, we gather, the people are gathered in their communities. And before, we would just have like a mass or a ceremony, if there are catechumens, that was based on the Bible, the gospel, and then preaching and songs. And then some songs that have been written about praying to God for rain. But after we've met with the people, we've found ways to, we've asked them how they want to do that. And now in our ceremonies, we involve some of their local rituals and their customs. There's a process, a period of reconciliation that happens before we even start the service. A chicken is to be sacrificed. And women, called Malende women, are invited, and they know the traditional dances that are used. Now, if you could be there, if you could see the joy that's not only on the people, the women who are dancing, but on all the communities, it's like that conversation you talk about. People are engaged, more so than a regular liturgy that we have. Whenever there's a traditional song that's brought in a certain way of dancing, a certain style, they come even more alive than they normally do. And I think as that can happen more often, that dialogue, that joining of traditional dance and church and gospel, the more that happens, the more the people feel at home in the church community.
And then you can almost feel that vitality, at that point. I keep thinking, Mike, about how we need to learn from this ourselves. There's a whole sociology of religion that would look at this question and say what happens with any religious organization, any church, is that it starts out with great enthusiasm, and the Spirit is obviously present, and people are excited about the message, and they see its ramifications, and they're engaged in it, and so on. And then things begin to get put into routines and formalized, and so on. And it's easy just to fall into old patterns and to accept the message as it is and not see its freshness and hear the same gospels over, the same parables and same rituals at church, and hear the same kind of homilies over and over. And it gets to be a matter of routine, and we lose the zest. And churches do that as they get older, in a sense. And periodically, of course, you need a revitalization, which has occurred throughout the history of the church, like the founding of the great mendicant orders in the Middle Ages, Franciscans and Dominicans, and bringing a new vitality to the church. Well, maybe we, in the United States here, where we can easily fall into routine or just be superficial about the religion, we can learn something in this dialogue with the church in Zimbabwe that you represent and serve there, that this new kind of enthusiasm. Maybe that's one of the values of having that kind of missionary outreach.
That just to hear that there are people who are coming more and more and being very active within the church can have people raise the question here and say, well, what's happening there that isn't here? What have we lost? Or what is there?
I've heard people in our parish say that when they see some of our young people joining the church after going through the RCIA, that gives them a boost, that they see someone else has made a decision to do this as an adult, and they're impressed by it. And I was just impressed by, you were talking about the RCIA there lasting a couple years as they're beginning.
Right, a minimum 2-year period, sometimes longer. Just because it takes that they take that time and the seriousness of the commitment that's involved.
Is that their own sense that it ought to be that length of time? And
I think some of them would like it a little faster, maybe.
Uh-huh.
Seems it's more of a policy within the diocese there, and within most of the African church communities, they take a longer period of.
But I would take it that you think it's wise in general.
I do, yeah.
It gives them a chance to assimilate it.
And to compare what the Catholic Church is compared to some of the other Christian churches that are in the area and that they deal with. I was thinking as you talked there, the Avery Dulles' article talks about re-evangelization.
Oh, yeah, say some more about that.
Just that there are two types. That first to evangelize, or primary evangelization of those who have not yet heard the gospel.
And that would be example what happens to the Tonga tribe when a group goes out and starts to form its own church and so on.
Exactly. And the other, that of re-evangelization, of those who have been baptized and active within the church for years, but somehow seem to have lost a sense of life or vitality there. And that, I think, is the real focus of evangelization in the years to come. My thought is that if the evangelization happens naturally, it's the old missionary guideline of get in, get on with it, get out. What is the getting about is that there's life there, and if we have something to offer, we're going to show it just by the life that we live. If that's not happening, either here in the States or in our situation in Zimbabwe, no one's going to be attracted to that. But if there's a vitality, there's a discipleship going, there's a sense of discipleship that goes beyond the Sunday service or weekend service, then that's going to affect people.
Mike, once the people over there make this commitment and they are baptized into the community and so on, do you see a lot of fidelity? Do you see them sticking with it? Do you have a large dropout rate or people who move in other directions after they come into the church?
There's been an ebb and a flow over the last few years that we've been there, that you see some when they move out and go into the city to work. Then when they come back, they're still faithful to the church. There's been some pastoral problems that come in when young people become very active within the church community. Then they get married outside the church, and then it's years before their traditional marriage is complete, so they can't yet be married in the church, can't receive the Eucharist, so then they become discouraged. And so that's caused some people to move away. You need to find a pastoral
practice to deal with this.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. The art of pastoral ministry has to come into play here in some fashion.
Right.
I remember my own mentor, Karl Rahner, writing about this years ago, that we had to take more seriously the marriage customs in Africa, and that we couldn't simply think of one canon law as applying to every place in the world. That there are indigenous customs that have to be taken seriously in this whole evangelization process. He was very positive about it. He felt that the church as a whole would learn from this, and that we need not always have just one standard in such things as the marriage relationship.
What about with regard to celebration of Eucharist? Have you heard much about that with other cultures in terms of how to do that, or?
Not really. I mean, I think of in terms of the Orthodox tradition, where you have the very long celebration in the Eastern Christian churches and a lot of incense and chanting and so on, where it has a different flavor than it would have here in the United States. And I think, the only other things I hear are in terms of the base communities, the way they try to work out their own liturgies, often without priests. I suppose our own experience in the United States today with pastoral administrators might flow into that in one way or another. But I might just say that I do think that on our college campuses, as you well know, a lot of times very good liturgies occur there precisely because they play to the sensibilities of the students and take seriously their concerns, or try to focus the liturgy around the needs of students. So I might see an example there of something that at least the principles can be made more universal, I would think.
Some of the things I've read about the church in Africa in this upcoming synod is some people are hopeful that they'll discuss how liturgy is celebrated, not just in terms of, say, using the music and the drums and the shakers that's already a part of the liturgy, but more in terms of what about the gathering itself, that it seems more appropriate for the sign of peace to be at the beginning as people gather, and then that the meal be shared, which is how they would do it normally in there. There's after the reconciliation, then there's a meal, and then the teaching, that the liturgy of the Word would be after, and ascending forth from there. That if we're really open to listening to what is natural to the people there, we might find some changes in the church in the future with regard to this new evangelization.
Of course, my own framework for that is Karl Rahner's notion again of the world church, which we're moving into an era where we will take more seriously the indigenous cultures, and we will have an African Christianity that really reflects the mores of the people, their fundamental insights, and so on. I mean, theologically, I don't see any reason why that kind of adaptation can't be made, and there's a lot of theological opinion that would support that. And I think it'll be a question of whether the African bishops want to move in that direction, right? And how much they listen to the people who are desirous of that.
Right. There's a proverb I'd like to share. It says, "My heart is like a tree that only grows well when it feels at home." And I think that we can see a connection there with the church, being like the tree planted in its own soil, that if the church is truly Tongan, African, American, in the good sense, it will be within our own soil, and the gospel will be proclaimed there. That's the task of the new evangelization, is a real respect for tradition and culture and the people that we're with.
That's really well said, Mike, and helps summarize what we've been talking about here, it seems to me. And it produces the soil also for that new enthusiasm that you've been talking about. So we've been talking about evangelization and a new enthusiasm that goes with it. And we see that in this dialogue, it can be extremely stimulating. It seems to me you exemplify that yourself. You've learned so much and in the process, and your perspectives have been broadened, and that's a wonderful thing to see. It's an example, to me at least, of how interaction with another culture can enrich this whole Christian faith of ours.